6 to all elements. You are cleared to move in on the objective.
The year was 1998. Up until now, a studio called NovaLogic was sort of famous for creating all sorts of military combat games. Ones that involved the F-22 Lightnings, ones that involved the Comanche attack helicopter, and even tanks with the Armored Fist series. But now it was time to take the plunge into a brand new genre. Well, not precisely brand new, having been pioneered about 5 years beforehand by Wolfenstein 3D, by Doom, by many other titles, but this was a different take on the FPS. This was going to be an open world, military, realistic-ish, simulator-ish game, with quotation marks on some of the later bits. Now sure, this wasn't the first FPS that tried to be a simulator. It was preceded by Rainbow Six, which we can all agree is a much better simulator. It's a more tactical game. It's something that involves a lot more careful planning, a lot more careful thinking, but Delta Force made you feel like you were in actual combat. It made you feel like you were actually playing a game that simulated things much better. And it did it with a lot of smoke and mirrors. Great smoke and mirrors, but still smoke and mirrors. This was a game where bullets did not have fall off. You would shoot a bullet, it would go straight, no problems. But if you shot it up in the air, you would sort of see the trajectory because bullets had tracers. You would see it fall off. That never actually happened if you shot anything on the ground. They would never fall off. Sure, grenades would go in an ellipse, but bullets not so much. You could also do stuff that was previously probably seen only in the build engine and not that often in certain cases. You could shoot just about everything, and sometimes, well, not sometimes, a few times, you would get results. But those few times you would get results, they would be impressive. For example, you saw a bird up in the air, you could shoot it, it would die. You could walk over to its corpse and look at it. You killed the bird, you bastard. You are here to kill other people. And I mean people, not birds. You could shoot trees, you could shoot cactuses and they would explode. You could shoot cars and they would explode. Some of them. A few of them. You would need very big rockets. Luckily, you had such at your disposal. And everything took place in a completely open environment that you could see from edge to edge. There were no walls, apart from the occasional building. There were no loading screens. There were no barriers. You were in an open world, free to do as you wish, free to achieve your objective any way you wanted to. Not that you had quite a lot of options, but still, I've gotta say, Delta Force 1, as simplistic of a game as it was, still offered you more tactical depth than most Call of Duty games. You just had the ability to do more because you weren't on a set path, you weren't in a corridor. You could actually choose how you approach the situation. And that's a good thing because, well, this is what the game boiled down to. How you approach a situation. There was a story in the game, well, if you bother to read the briefings, you'll be told about events and things and stuff as you progress through the campaigns, each mission unlocking another one, and so on until you get progressively more difficult objectives, ones involving rescuing prisoners of war, ambushing armored convoys, stealing stuff, destroying stuff, or just killing everybody, or blowing up stuff too, with your laser designator. You had quite a lot of missions in this game, and I mean quite a lot. Like, you had sort of more content in this, like in the single player, than you would in, again, some Call of Duty games and some Battlefield games too. Though again, it sort of depends on how you play them. If it was the first time you played them, if it was the first time you played one of these games, yeah, it would take you a while to get used to how it worked, how it played, the controls, and in general how the game worked, leading to potentially tens of hours of gameplay in a single player, especially since there was no option to save the game and you would die with one shot. This goes back to the realism thing. Delta Force, I cannot say was a very realistic game, but it did do this thing right. You would die in basically one shot unless you turn down the difficulty, and then you would have a life bar which let you take about 3 shots, I believe, and you would find, if you enabled power-ups, you would be able to find along the map sort of health packs and also ammo packs, because those are also considered just power-ups that you could disable for more realism. Sure, the illusion of realism was often broken by things like the AI running into buildings, people dying when you shot them in the legs, people dying when you shot near them. Let's say that at some points it sort of looked like that scene in Hot Shots 2 when Charlie Sheen is throwing bullets at people, like chugging bullets at people and they still die. But still, in the game, it still kind of felt authentic, it felt real. And part of the reason is all the stuff the game gave you. You could customize your loadout when you started. You could have a Beretta sniper rifle that could kill a man at over a kilometer away. You could have a silenced submachine gun, or you could just get the M4 with a grenade launcher, which was the most versatile weapon in the game, and you had no reason to use something else unless you wanted to be stealthy. Because in this game you could be stealthy, you could shank people with your knife like in Counter-Strike, you could shoot them in the face with a silenced pistol. You also had a non-silenced pistol and no other pistols. You also had grenades and the aforementioned rocket launcher. Stealth in this game wasn't really enforced, it wasn't even all that important, but depending on the level of difficulty you were playing on, if the enemy knew where you were, if the enemy knew you existed on the map, you'd be dead. Again, you would be killed with one shot, and even if the AI wasn't all that bright, when you have about 30 soldiers on the map, one of them can randomly, by accident at least, kill you. And you can see them all on the map. That's something that really speaks to the origin of this game. It speaks to the pedigree of a NovaLogic game. You had maps for this game. You had top-down GPS upon which you could see marked out allies, enemies, either ones that you have seen, or you could enable the game to show you everything in case you wanted a more carefree experience, I should say. And you could have overlays on your screen, for example with the map, which showed you the waypoints and the enemies. And you could zoom in and out, and the waypoints really, again, was part of the whole smoke and mirrors aspect, because every simulator game ever made was waypoint based. Air combat simulators. If it wasn't a straight off dogfight, you would have objectives like go to location X and patrol, go to waypoint Y and patrol there too. Submarine simulator games had the exact same thing. The waypoints, the way they were built on that map, they put into your head the idea that this was a simulator, which is a different way than Call of Duty does it, where they just put the follow me thing on your screen and never show you the map, so you never know if this is actually the optimal path or if this is just leading you by the nose because the game doesn't trust you. In Delta Force's case, there was no issue with trust. The waypoints were there to indicate a path where you would find your objectives, but you could go from any direction. You could do anything. You could just sawed off and shoot birds. Sure, you'd still have to finish the mission sometime, but hell, you could do it. As long as you completed the objective, you didn't kill any of your allies, you didn't die yourself, and sometimes if you got to the chopper and extracted, you were okay. So again, maybe not much in the way of realism. I mean, you could even play it with a third-person camera, though you did have to activate a picture-in-picture mode with your first-person view because you could not actually play it properly in third person. I believe in the co-op campaign, the picture-in-picture camera could belong to your ally, though I'm not exactly sure if that's true. I've never played the campaign, just the competitive multiplayer mode, where you shoot other players or compete for objectives like capture the flag or King of the Hill. It was actually quite fun in the multiplayer, because again, you can die in one shot. And hey, another positive aspect of the game, even though this was a military shooter with pretense to realism in its presentation, it did something that modern military shooters with pretense to realism have only started to do now, and that would be let you play as a female character. There were 3 of them. Yes, I know, it's shocking that female characters existed in video games before Assassin's Creed Syndicate. It's amazing, I know. It's almost like years before 2015 existed. Delta Force isn't what you would call a superb game, but it felt right. I mean, it was a military simulator game that didn't simulate anything military actually, but it gave you the lingo, it gave you the feeling. And it did it without the sort of indoctrination factor I talked about yesterday. It was just a military game, one that excelled at the time at presenting combat in a realistic mode. Not again that it was realistic, it just looked like it was. There were no things that you could confuse with advanced tactics. Yeah, I could flank people quite easily because I would not have peripheral vision or ears sometimes. And you could approach your objectives from any direction you could, but again, since the AI wasn't all that bright, in the end it didn't really matter. But again, still, you weren't trapped in a corridor, you weren't on a predefined, completely linear path. That combined with the open world setting with the graphics that were taken out of Comanche helped Delta Force cement itself as a standard, one that would be later aped and emulated by other series. And well, you can probably blame Delta Force for Call of Duty and Medal of Honor and all the other stuff. Delta Force continued for many years with a lot of games, out of which I believe I only played Extreme or Extreme 2, one of them being actually a remake of this game. And all I remember about it was that if you threw a grenade in a room while you were at the door, the blowback of the explosion will kill you and fling you way up in the air. There was supposed to be another game, I believe it was announced in around 2008, it was called Delta Force Angel Falls. But NovaLogic has been very silent about it for, well, 9 years. Thankfully, now that NovaLogic is part of the big THQ Nordic family, you can find all their games on GOG, on Steam, and just about everywhere. And hey, who knows? Maybe that means we'll get a new Delta Force game. Question is, do we need one? Do we want one? That all depends on how it's going to be made. Because if it's gonna be just like every other modern military shooter, probably not. And if it's gonna be made like Delta Force 1, again, probably not. It may be past its age, but if you're curious about it, give the game a go. You can find it on GOG and Steam.
Blackwood to King 6. Bravo is down. Mission abort.